Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today we're going to do a skill builder video. Well, it's a mixed skill builder and a sewing felt animals kind of video, because we sometimes need to check whether or not the clothing pattern is going to fit our characters. Now this is because when we're sewing our characters and we're stuffing them, and especially if we're not using the cord 4 felt, then there is a case that the stuffing, overstuffing, or there might be a little bit of mechanical stretch in the fabric, which then means that that garment or the clothing garments then are fitting a little tighter than we wanted to. And so what I wanted to talk to you today is around about stuffing your characters, making your characters, and the things that are going to impact on you then sewing the clothes, which is then the next stage once you've created your first base character really. And it doesn't matter which character you're making, whether you're working from the Lunar Lapping range or whether you're working from the Lily Rose Dolls ranges. The principles are the same, and actually the principles also carry forward into sewing for children and sewing for adults as well. So it's one of those skills that is really, I think, is really useful to know. Obviously you can sew without this information, but I think sometimes just talking around this subject can help. Now, if you don't want to listen to all of the waffle and all the explanations, then jump ahead to this timestamp here, and that will then take you straight to where I'm doing the doing, if you like. But for those of the people who want to talk about the reasons why we might want to do this and how it can be helpful, then I'm going to just carry on for a few moments in giving you the background detail really, and just expanding on that and some things to think about. So you can jump ahead if you want to, or you can stay with me if you don't. The choice is yours. I don't mind. I won't know either way, so you can choose whichever one you want to do. But what I found is that when we are making the characters, then sometimes when it actually comes to dressing them, sometimes the fit on some of the patterns comes out a little more snug than we might want. And this is particularly the case with the larger friends in the Lunar Lapping range. So think Ernest Fox and the larger rabbit, I can't think what her name is right now, Flora Rabbit, that's it, and also Bramble Bear. So I've made some of the outfits for Bramble Bear, including the, I think it's from the Meadow Sweet range of clothing, which is the waistcoat and the trousers, and then I've also made the old schoolroom dress as well. And because the trousers are fitted around the waist and around the hips on a Bramble Bear, and then the old schoolroom dress is fitted around the sleeves and then down the bodice, then there are some things that you can know about these fits before you actually cut them out. Now, you'll have heard me talking about making a toile, and a toile is a French word, and it just means a practice garment really. So in that you would choose a fabric, if you can, similar to the fabric that you're going to make in the clothes from. So if the fabric that you're making the clothes from has got some stretch in it, you'd need to use a fabric with stretch in it. But if it's not got any stretch, if it's a woven fabric like a quilting cotton or a wool fabric, say for Hamish's kilt, then those types of things don't have any stretch in them. So again, for your toile, you would use a fabric, a scrap fabric that you've got lying around. It can be old curtains, it can be old bed sheets, it can be whatever, in order that you can have a practice run at making the garment to check for fit. And then on some of the garments where I've noticed that the fit is off, you'll see that actually before we get into the actual sewing of the garment, then for each of those, the ones that I've mentioned, so out of the meadows, I think, is it called the thistledown waistcoat, and the trousers, it's just from the Meadow Sweet range. I hope to get the book out ready and show you, then you'll know what to talk about. Hold on one second. Okay, I've got the booklet, but what you can't also see is that I've got a whole host of characters down here as well, just to talk through with you. So this is the Meadow Sweet pattern pack that I'm talking about from Lunar Lapping. So you've got Bramble Bear there, who is a bigger character, and also you've got a Flora Rabbit there. Don't be confused and think she's Lunar, because she's not. Because if I show you, where my Luna's out the way at the moment. So this is that's the, gosh, my memory's just rubbish at the moment. This is the mouse from the Lunar Lapping range, so you can see how big she is. And then if I show you Bramble Bear next to them, you can see the difference in the sizes, much different sizes in there. So the Flora Rabbit is this kind of size, I believe, and I think there's even a bigger one that you can make, but there's a huge difference there. So you can't think that this character on the front here is Luna and then think, oh, I like that dress, I'll make that dress for her, because this is for the larger friends. So this is for Bramble Bear, as I've said, who I absolutely adore making. A really lovely gift, and super sweet, even just with a ribbon around its neck if you don't want to go into making all of the dress for a new baby, or just for a gift for somebody. Really nice. Great fun to make as well. She's made out of boucle, not out of felt. But yeah, so they've got these characters here. And then I've also found that making a toile has helped me in a couple of other situations as well. So I made Hamish from the Lunar Lapping range, the Highland Cow, and I actually made his tie on his shirt thicker and longer, because in the picture it looks like this in the book, but then when I actually made it, and I did double check that I'd made it correctly to the correct pattern dimensions, etc., it came out half as wide and shorter as well. So in the video on how to make Hamish's shirt, there's a tutorial on how to increase the pattern, should you so wish, in order to have it looking like this, and I show you the two side by side so that you can then make the choice. Likewise, when I made Otterline, bless her, I did stuff her well, it is fair to say. She had one too many fish pies, I think, but bless her, the fisherman's top, which is this one here with the pockets in, which there's a video on my channel for as well, that also would not get over her head at all in the original pattern size. So again, I spoke through how to change the pattern in order to add some extra width to that around, so that we opened up this neck edge here in order to get the look I wanted. And I think some of that was just that the top here was designed for a character with a head like that, and as you can see, there's a huge difference in the size of the head there, and I kept to my same seam allowances when I was making the character. But again, you know, you may find, especially if you're a beginner, that sometimes your seam allowances are a little too scant, too small, and therefore your character will come out that little bit bigger, or it might be too generous and then your character comes out a little bit smaller. But it's important to, when you're making the clothes, that you understand how those small changes over a small number of seams can actually add up to quite a bit. It doesn't take a lot for a few millimetres to add up to 0.5 centimetre or to 1 centimetre difference, and then you kind of get a fit then that starts to pull. So like Otterline's culottes here, I'd prefer those to have sat, you know, with the pleat a little bit further in towards the middle. And I think at the end of the video I said that if I got this again, I'd probably add a little bit more room here and here, and maybe on the back as well, just to give them a little bit more room. And this is mainly because on Otterline, her hip joints are on the outside, and again, she may have been drafted for a character like that's Wilhelmina, isn't it? Wilhelmina Mouse, it's just come to me, like Wilhelmina, where her legs are sewn into the base of her body, and then she's not got the bulk of a hip joint. I'll just lift her dress up and you'll see the difference in the two widths as well. And she's not got the same bulk on the width of hers. So I suppose I'm just trying to demonstrate why this is important, and how it can help you, in order that then when you are then going on to make your clothes, especially if you're short of time and you think you've not got time to make a toile, then you would be able to then jump straight in and just do a quick check of your pattern, and you'll be able to jump in. Likewise with adult and children's clothing, sometimes some patterns are really helpful, and they'll include what's called finished garment measurements, as well as the measurements for the size. So the difference between the two is something called ease, and in clothing for children and for adults, it's the difference between something being skin tight to you and then having the room to move your arms and feel comfortable in that. So say like a t-shirt doesn't have any ease in it at all, or actually some negative ease because it's a stretch fabric and you want it to be a nice fit. But if you tried to make that same pattern out of a woven fabric like a quilting cotton, you'd be straight-jacketed in. You wouldn't be able to move because there's no ease built into that pattern in order to allow you to move. And it's the same with the characters. The characters want to be able to move their arms, or they want to be able to move their legs because you want them to be sitting or standing, and so they need room in the garments to be able to do that. So the difference between the measurements for each size and then the finished garment measurements is the ease that we're talking about. And sometimes if your character is slightly more well stuffed than you started off with, or that the designer of the pattern intended, then you'd need to add a little bit more room to account for that when you're going forward. I hope this is all making sense, and I hope it's interesting to you. It's always interesting to me as well, because we're always looking for ways to make our sewing more effective and to save time where we can, and not waste precious fabrics either on something that doesn't fit. And I certainly was so thrilled that I'd done the toile for the fisherman's top for Otterline, because as I say, when I tried to, I think there's a picture with it just having one ear through the neck edge, and that was all that would get through there. So let me tilt the camera down and then I'll show you what I mean about this and how we can check the ease against our character, and then we'll be able to see where we are. And perhaps I'll use the fisherman's top. I can use the fisherman's top, can't I, as an example, because I know that I did change that, or Bramble Bear maybe. Okay, let me have a think and I'll come back to you in a second. Okay, so you're going to need your book or your pattern, whichever you've got. It depends if it's a freestanding pattern or not. You're also going to need your character as well that you're trying to fit. So in this one, we've got Otterline here on the book of her fisherman's top, haven't we? And we can see a picture of Otterline here without her clothes on, and she's got her joints on the outside of her body. But then let's have a look at her fisherman's top. Let's see whereabouts that is. Should have got this page ready for you sooner, just bear with me. I'll cut it out if it takes me too long. No, it's here. Right, okay. So we do need the pattern for this. So we can see how this one looks in the pattern. And we can see that the neck on that is slightly tighter than the neck I've got on mine. Oops, if you can, let me have that up for you like that. And then if I put Otterline just there. But otherwise, it's not too dissimilar. Maybe the top's a little bit tighter around her tummy, and I've put a little bit more room in there just to sit nicely over the top of the culottes. But otherwise, it's not, the alterations I've made to the pattern have not changed the actual look of that at all. So it is possible to make these alterations without actually changing the look of it. But what you're going to need to do is go into to have a look at your patterns at the back here and find the pattern that you are wanting to check. Oh, here it is, fisherman's top. Okay. So it's a bit like when we sew for ourselves. There's certain things that we can look at. So let's do something nice and easy first. So we've got the actual fisherman's top here, and we've got the sleeve. Now, what we have to be aware of is our lines on our pattern. So a solid line here is our cutting line, and then the dashed line here is indicating the seam allowance, and it's normally 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimetre, depending on what you work in. And here we've got a sewing line there because this is the hem at the bottom of the sleeve. We've also got seam allowances down each side for the underarm seam in order to make this into the circular shape here. That's the seam there. So what we can do is, when we've got our pattern, is we measure from inside the sewing line. So again, you can double check as well just to make sure. So that seam allowance there in the book is 1/2 centimetre. And down the bottom here, it's about 1.5 centimetres, just under. So that's fine. So we're going to measure from this dotted line here to the dotted or dash line to the dash line just here. Because if we sew this pattern, cut it out on the line, and then we sew it with the correct seam allowances and turn up the correct amount, this point here between my fingers here and here is what's going to give us the length for the sleeve. So we're starting nice and easy. So let's measure that. Let's put our tape measure on the bottom of the hem here, and let's measure up to the top here, and we're just over 10 centimetres at the top of the shoulder. We've got the notch there to show us the top of the shoulder just there. So I'm measuring between this line here and this line just here. We then go to our character, and then we have a little look. Let me just take Otterline. Let's just take your arm out of here. Excuse, she's got fluff on her. Hopefully you can see. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to measure from the top of her shoulder joint, down to the length of the piece here, and we can see that the 10 centimetre goes mid-arm. Let me just put a little pin, sorry Otterline for putting pins in you, but it'll be helpful for people to see. So then we also have to have a little look at the design. So we know we've got a shoulder seam here as well, and it's only minimal, so we could measure the shoulder seam if we wanted to and how close that is to the neck. But already I would suggest that on this sleeve here, if I didn't want my sleeves to be ending up here, then there's room to add a little bit extra onto the pattern in order that we can then make this sleeve nice and long where we want it to be. So I kind of like it kind of like there. So again, it just has a have a look and see if that's where you would like it. Let's see how bit long the sleeve turned out in the end. So I've actually made that sleeve, yeah, to 10 centimetres, and that's come out there. So it must have a slight drop shoulder on there, so it's not going right up into the arm joint. And if I put my finger in the neck there, I can feel that it's not gone quite up to the arm joint. So what I'm saying is that you can actually measure and decide in advance if you want to extend this pattern down, and I would put a line across and then what's called slash and spread that pattern piece and add a little bit in, because you can always take it out, but it's really difficult to add it in again once you've actually cut this out if you decide it's too short. So that's just an easy example just to how to measure that. So then let's go on to looking at her, I might as well take this off for you offline for the moment in order we can have a look at that. Right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to look at this underarm area here around her chest. So really I'm going sort of like at the bottom of the colouring just here to see where that fits. And what we can do with that is we can go on to her fisherman's top, and we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to take notice of where we've got our seam allowance, and we can measure our seam allowance, and again that's 1/2 centimetre on the side there, but that should be all right. And we're going to measure between this dotted line to here. Now this is, we've got a fold mark here with the double-edged arrow here at the bottom and top, so we can measure through from there to the line, and we've got 7 centimetres. So then we can double for that piece. And if you don't know how to, if you're not good on your math, obviously I can double 7, but once you start add it all on, then it can get difficult. So we've got 14 cent. I'll just fold my tape measure over at 7 centimetre point, and it tells me where we are. So 14 centimetres for that. So then let's measure that again on the other side for the back of the thing, and we're just over 7 centimetres, 7.5 centimetres. So we are 14 to 21, 28, so we'll be to 29 centimetres. So that would give us the circumference that this top is designed to fit. Okay, so we've measured within the seam allowance, so from the dotted line across to the fold line here, and then we've doubled it because that's going to be cut on the fold, that's double. And then this is the back of the top, so we've measured from the solid line on the fold there, which we put on your folded fabric, across to the dash line here. So that would then, those two added together and doubled would give us our circumference. So let's just put this round our character again, and this is a loose fitting top supposed to be, and we can then measure that onto our character and then put the tape measure round, and that kind of looks okay until you start to come down to the hips. So I've got it held at 29 centimetres there on the tape measure, and as you can see, if we wanted this top to sit over the top of the trousers, then actually that's not going to work for us very well, because that's not going to allow for her hips at all. Can you see I can't get that tape measure down enough over her hip joints, it's stopping it. So that would tell me that adding some width to this top here for this character is a good idea. Likewise, you can also measure down. So here, this folded line gets taken up to here. So we're going to measure from the shoulder, the dotted line on the shoulder, down to that line there, and I've got 8 centimetres. I'm then going to take my tape measure off because this folds up to make the pocket. Start it again on there, so the 8 centimetre goes on there and goes down to the edge there, and that's 11.5 centimetres for me. So then I can measure from the back of her neck, where the join is, or the top of the shoulder, sorry, wasn't it? Oops, sit still, that line. Sorry, just lost the book as well. So from the top of her shoulder down, I can see that 11.5 centimetres, this top is designed to fit over the top of the hip joint, because the 11.5 centimetre is below the tail look and across the hips. So I know that if I made this top the way the pattern is drafted for this character that I've made, that there's going to be a problem with the fit, because around here, this bit here, that's supposed to sit slightly further down on her hips, as mine does, there wouldn't be enough fabric, and so it would bunch up over the top when she was wearing it, obviously with her arms in. So that's what I'm trying to sort of show to you really, is how to measure. And also let's just do the other one as well, which is her arm. Get my book back. So on my pattern again for her top, sorry about that, it just dropped off the table. Oh, I need the pattern pages here. We can also check, so we've got the width here as well. So at the sort of mid-arm point, elbow point if you like, we can measure again between the dotted lines again going across, and we've got 10.25 centimetres, which will give us the round for the width of her arm. And then we can then use that to try it onto our character to see how that fits. And 10.5 is pretty tight. There's not a lot of room in there for that. So again, I think I did end up adding a little bit into the sleeves as well in order to make this slightly longer. So that's an example with Otterline, just to show you there. I'm going to show you another character as well, just so that it hopefully just demonstrates it if you didn't catch up with that one. Let me just get everything together and I'll come back to you. Okay, so this time I've got the Meadow Sweet pattern pack from Luna Lappin, and you get this from coolcrafting.co.uk in the UK. And they've got these Bonheur, I think I said that was the whistle down suit. This was actually the suit that I made with the waistcoat with the pockets on it. And then it's also got these long trousers here with the lovely pleats on the front. And in order to check these, I'd check around the hip level, and I'd also check the length as well to see how high they go up the leg when the character, sorry you can't see that, can you? When the character sits down, because I think that's relevant too. And we can look at the picture to see how the designer intended them to look. So we can look, they're quite long on the back here, with a little bit of there's a couple of breaks in there, isn't there, in the trouser along the front. But the pleats are supposed to stand quite nicely and not folded over at all. You can see the pleats in there quite nicely. Better, isn't it? Quite nicely. They're not sort of pulled out and pulled taut. So let's just have a little look at these trousers then. So this pattern comes on a big sheet of paper like this, but again we've still got the same solid line for our cutting line, and then we've got this dotted, oh sorry about the paper crinkle, this dotted line which is on the inside, which is your sewing line. So let's just check the seam allowance on here. So the seam allowance on here is 1 centimetre, so that's double what it is on the smaller characters. So we need to take that into account, but the principle is still the same. So we've got a waistband here that folds over at the top, and we've got a dash line there to suggest that that's where that turning line is. And then we've got our hem down here at the bottom, which is minimal. So then we can then put our tape measure on the top line, at the top there on that straight line, and measure all the way down here. And we get 31 centimetres on my pattern. So then if we go to our character, which is Bramble Bear here, and then we think, well, those trousers are going to sort of fit towards the waist area. We'd want them to be about here in the middle of the back, and then take that down to 31 centimetres. Then we can see that that's pretty good. I know I'm bending Bramble's leg there, but that takes it down to the end. Now there is a turn up on these trousers, so but that would be enough for me to think, okay, they're there or thereabouts on there with that length on the bottom of the trouser there. So I probably wouldn't add any more to the length there. So let's now check the waist measurement. So we've got our back leg here and our front leg here. But when we're doing the front, we need to remember there's a pleat. And the pleat is denoted by these markings here, where you take the star across to the dot. And so we'll have a look. So let's just go sort of like halfway down. So we've got a crotch curve here. and we've got our waistband. So this leg's upside down at the moment. So our waistband's here, the hem's here, and this is the inside leg here. So let's go sort of like halfway down across the waist there, and let's measure in between the two dash lines, which is our sewing line, and that gives me 11 centimetres. So that's for 1/4. We can either double that now or wait until the end. So let's save our 11 centimetres. My maths isn't that good. And then we put that 11 centimetre mark onto the dash line here, and we take that across, and we get 20.5 to just there. So if we fold the tape measure in half, then that takes us to 41.5 centimetres, and that would give us our waist then, because we've doubled this one and we've doubled that one. So we can then go to our character, and we can sort of think that's round about the top of the hips, and let's have a little look at how that's fitting. So I can see here 41 centimetres is fine where the buttons are on the top of the hips, but if I wanted to go down into this section here, the thigh, then that's not a lot of room really. And I know we've got a little bit extra from the crotch curve, but it's fairly straight at the top of the leg pattern here. So I would then measure, and even take an account of the tail as well, so just slightly below those buttons, and I would say I would probably like those trousers to be 44 centimetres instead of the 41 centimetres, or 40.5 it was, if I remember correctly, there. So I would then be looking at adding some space to these trousers in order then to make these slightly wider, and give you more circumference in this area here around the tummy. And again, it can just be to the stuffing of the animal, it can be the way that the pattern's designed, it can be anything, but by just double checking a few points on the measurement, we already know that the length is going to be okay, or should be okay. And then on the width of here, we know then that we need to then add some more. And all I would do is I'd find my straight. Okay, so I've got a sleeve pattern here that I've just traced off, and I've got my centre notch here at the top of the shoulder, and I've got a double notch here and a single notch here, and I've got my grain line here. I've not bothered drawing on the dash line for the sewing line because I know it's 1/4 of an inch here, and I can always refer back to my pattern for what the hem is intended to be. But you'll note this double-edged straight line here with an arrow on the top and on the bottom, and that indicates the grain of the fabric. And so generally speaking, that is a point at which on your pattern it's going to be straight. So I just take a straight edge and I then join that grain line up and down to the bottom. In this case, the grain line is going through the centre notch at the top up here and then through the hems. That's fine. What I do then is I do a couple of lines across, one there and one there. So it's when I was talking about the lines going across. It's just a pen line that just goes across and through, dissects that grain line. Then what I do is then cut this in half. And if you follow the Meadow Sweet patterns, or you follow the anorak pattern, not the anorak pattern, the fisherman's top pattern, then you'll see that this is already done for you, or we talk about how this is done on that section. Let me just put that piece off. So then what I do is get some tape and put this on. Just bear with me because I have switched from talking about the trousers to talking about this sleeve circumference, so I don't want to confuse everybody, but I thought this pattern piece would be more simple for you to look at whilst we're talking about the actual process, because I realised I was starting to talk about things that I'd not actually shown you. So we'll just tape down half of this pattern like that. So we've got a bigger piece underneath. There's our line. You can still see half of the dissected line just here and just here, and that's our grain line that I cut through. And then what I'm going to do is, using a seam allowance there, I'm going to need to add 1 centimetre onto the circumference of the sleeve. Then I mark 1 centimetre as a line across, top and bottom, so that it's nice and straight. And then you're going to use your straight edge again to join those two lines together. Just extend them slightly down the length of the pattern so you've got a good line to go down. And I can mark on this plus 1 centimetre. So that's where we are at the moment. So original pattern, and here's the bit. Let me shade it in for you, because that will probably be easier for you to see then how much we are adding. So that's the shaded area, it shows you where we're adding. And then this piece now, you have to just draw your lines across. So where we drew those lines that dissected, we're just going to extend those into the new space across the bit that we're adding. And then using our tape, we then match up the other half of the dissected line onto the other side of that gap that we've created. This is called slash and spread, and I really like it because it's just so simple. So that's what we've got now. So this pattern piece now has 1 centimetre added all the way through down the length of it, and all we do now is we just match up across the top and draw in that sleeve head. And then because we've added 1 centimetre, we can add a new notch in the middle of that area, and we join together at the bottom on the hem there, and then we can cut this new pattern piece out. Everything else has pretty much stayed the same. And we've got our new sleeve pattern, but we've now got that 1 centimetre added down the middle. So this circumference now will be 1 centimetre bigger than it was. What you have to remember is when you are working on something like trousers, so you have to sort of think that's the whole sleeve, that one pattern piece is a whole sleeve, so it goes all the way around to give you that extra room. When you're working with a top, generally you work with a half of the front pattern, but that's a quarter of the pattern overall. So if you add 1 centimetre down the front of a pattern piece that's here, you're actually going to be adding 2 centimetres, because by default another centimetre will be added here because you're working with that half of the pattern. So if you add 1 centimetre down on this piece here, when you spread that out, when you then have your fabric double and put your pattern piece on it and cut it out, you'll also be getting this side of the bodice as well extended, and that will have another centimetre in it. So on that front pattern piece, if you added 1 centimetre on the pattern here, actually that gives you 2 centimetres in the diameter across here. So that's why sometimes you just need to bear in mind, because it might be that you only need 0.5 centimetre here, because then when you've cut out your fabric on the double, you'll actually then have 1 centimetre across this front extra, and that's what's kind of important. So I hope that sort of starts to give you an introduction to pattern fitting and how you can, you know, look at these patterns. I mean, it doesn't matter which book you're using. I mean, I spoke about Lily Rose dolls. I mean, the important thing about those is that they don't have any seam allowance in the pattern pieces themselves. So whereas you've got a solid line here for a jacket, then that will be the line that's actually your sewing line once it's cut out, because you'll need to add on your seam allowance onto this pattern piece before you cut it out. So that's a really important thing to remember with the Lily Rose dolls. Generally speaking, if you have 2 lines and you've got a dash line like this one, you've got a dash line and a solid line, it means that that seam allowance is already included. So all of the Lunar Lapping clothes, including the Meadow Suite, has seam allowance already added to the patterns. But Lily Rose dolls, because it's a different designer and a different way of doing it, then this here is actually your sewing line, and therefore you need to add on your seam allowance. And there, if you go to my Lily Rose dolls playlist, there is a tutorial, a sew along on there, showing you exactly how to add it onto all of these edges, and especially around the curves. If you've never done it before, it'll sound really daunting, but again, it's really easy. It's just getting used to the fact that they're not included, especially if you're switching between the garments, because if you take it as not between 2 garments, between the 2 designers, because Lunar Lapping, Sarah Peel and Lunar Lapping includes hers, Claire Bowman of Lily Rose Dolls doesn't. So you'll need to know, because if you cut this out on this line here and then sew 1/4 inch inside that line, this whole garment will just be way too small for your character. There's no way it'll fit. So you just need to, it does say it at the top here that you need to add your 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance unless otherwise indicated, so that's fine. So on the fold line you don't add a seam allowance, but I go into all of that in that tutorial if you want to have a look at that. So I'm going to turn the camera around now so I can just sort of wrap up with you, and hopefully that all makes sense. Okay, so it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I kind of apologise but don't apologise for that, because I wanted to give you an introduction to things to be aware of, because sometimes when we're sewing for the first time we don't know what to look out for, and that's when things can turn around and bite us, and I don't want you to get that negative experience if you're a beginner sewist, of having your clothes for your characters then not fit your characters, because it's a bit like dressmaking for children and adults. It's not that there's anything wrong with what you've done. I mean, obviously your seam allowance is really important, and check that you can sew on a piece of paper with an old needle and then measure your seam allowance on the edge of the paper to see whether you're getting your accurate 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. But it just gives you a bit of a head up before you start to cut out the character's clothes, to make sure that if they are a little more firmly stuffed, and I do stuff mine really nice and firmly, then you've got some element of success before you even start. If anybody feels that this isn't enough of a tutorial or enough of a description and I've only just started to scratch the surface, or if you need some help actually altering a specific pattern that you're trying to work with, hello Otterline talking to me, then the thing that you can do is you can look out for my Facebook group, which is called Sewing by Claire, which is all one word, sewing support group, and in there you can then liaise with me, and you can put a post up saying I'm trying to alter this pattern and I'm struggling, or has anybody altered this pattern and can help me, and then I will jump in and give you a hand. Other people and other members might do. There's over 300 members there now, so others might do. It's not one of those groups that's like 10 posts every single day, because I certainly don't have time to post that much if I'm going to be recording videos for you, and I'm sure that you don't too. But it is a way that you and I can communicate a little more easily, other than being on YouTube comments. And also you can post pictures there, and you can ask your questions there, and you can also send me a private message if you want to, if you don't want the question to be in the group setting. But everybody's really nice there, so it's all fine. But I can understand why you might not know that just yet. But yeah, so that's generally what we do in order to make sure that a pattern fits. I hope it's been really interesting. I hope it's been useful. And if you're one of my new subscribers, welcome as well. I do tend to be quite wordy on my videos, just to warn you about that, but you can always speed me up, or you can always just jump to the points that you want to see how they are sewn, and then that way then you don't have to listen to all of my waffle. But a lot of people, especially if they're beginners, find the explanations quite useful, because I certainly like to know why and how, rather than just do this, do this, do this, or somebody jumps ahead. And so that's why the videos tend to be a little bit longer. So my apologies if that's not to your taste, but the overwhelming feedback is that it's to a lot of people's taste. So that's why I'm keeping it in and keeping it going. Anyway, I hope you've really enjoyed this video. I hope it's helped shed some light on it. Let me know what you think in the comments below if you want to. If not, then just scroll on ahead. And I hope you have a great day. Happy stitching, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.